Monday, 18th of November. Listen, thank you so much for joining us, tentatively, gingerly perhaps, as we launch into a full-on Nations League special totally edition. I say full-on Nations League, but actually we've got loads of other stuff to discuss. Why? Just as we sat down this morning, we were discussing things we don't like in football. Imagine that, listener. And you know what? Nations League didn't rank as anybody's number one. Daniel Storey, for example, give us yours because it's quite quaint.
Yeah, it's very niche, but I don't like it when football fans are singing what I consider to be a historic song that is slow and emotional. You all know the ones I mean. And fans of the other team pretend to be conductors by like sort of splaying their hands as if they were directing an orchestra. That really annoys me because it's done with a sort of smugness that is completely unwarranted. And it is pretty pedantic, I would say that.
Stamp that out. Tim Spiers. So much for you to be unhappy about in football. What ranks as your number one?
Well, I was going to say feigning injuries, but I've just remembered, you know, when TV broadcasters don't show you the match, that really annoys me. You know, when something's happening and you can hear the crowd
I see,
getting excited and they're showing a replay.
Yeah.
Or at full time when they cut straight to the managers shaking hands. That really annoys me. I want to see the players and the fans celebrating.
Yeah.
Not a banal handshake. Every single match. It really annoys me.
And your blood boils.
Yeah, because we've just invested ourselves in 90 to 100 minutes of these players, you know, giving everything for our enjoyment. And then it cuts straight to two people in suits just shaking hands. You want to see the emotion, the celebrations of the victory or defeat that we've all just invested ourselves in.
Right. What Tim had said prior to coming on air was the fact that you just watched the end of... I found that quite interesting, the end of the 99 Champions League final. And what struck you was the fact that no one was wasting time.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but Amazon put out the full final 10 minutes on their YouTube channel of Man United Bayern Munich, the 99 final. And it does really sort of strike you some of the differences that maybe... we don't think of these days because they're just so automatic. But the atmosphere was different, I thought. No phones in the crowd, obviously. There was just sort of constant singing from both ends. But also the lack of time wasting or feigning injury was really pointed. Bayern were 1-0 up, not wasting any time whatsoever. There's only 3 minutes injury time.
Fools.
Nobody going down holding their head, you know. Very just different times.
That'll learn them.
Yeah.
Collin, come on, let's heap a little bit more negativity on today's show.
Well, mine is pretty niche.
Is it?
Well, not really. I was going to say VAR officialdom.
That's not very niche at all.
No, it's not.
We had a question about this.
Infuriatingly so. And more so the sense that how that has helped sort of turbocharge senses of paranoia, senses of your club is institutionally targeted,
right? Okay,
and disadvantaged.
Okay,
which, just isn't true.
Well, here's a question. I say here's a question. I've got to find it now. M. Wood Jr. Good day to you. Does anybody know why on-field refs also do VAR? How about losing the incestuousness by getting a bunch of people in who know the rules but are fast at making good decisions on screen? Base them in an industrial estate in the Lake District, suggests M. Wood Jr., and keep them away from on-field refs. I like that.
There's an interesting point of how referees, whenever the VAR review comes, and then the on-field referee always feels under pressure to then give the decision. But and we saw that recently, which actually with David Coote and Michael Oliver. And Michael Oliver sort of had with the West Ham penalty against Manchester United later on, very contentious decision. And Michael Oliver was the senior referee in that scenario. So if a senior referee is telling a slightly less senior referee to make a decision, they will obviously feel under pressure to do so.
Right.
We obviously, before that, had Mike Dean for the Chelsea-Tottenham game, essentially being like, oh, he's my friend, I don't want to embarrass him. I think there should be a differential between the VAR and the on-field official.
Right. Is it a different...
what body they work for.
Is it a different skill set as well, do you think? Ooh, Daniel suck his teeth.
No, I mean, I agree with the general principle. I mean, they are training more VAR officials. I do think this idea that like
on-field officials as a separate kind of division almost.
I don't. There's definitely overlap, but that will become a more specialised tool, I think. But this idea that if we just appoint a group of random people and stick them in Cumbria, they won't immediately become this the Cumberland cabal and everyone rushing to find out who they really support and how many times they've been to watch Club X and they've lost at home in the 3 years before they became part of this cabal. It will happen. It's the culture that will make it this way. Without going all current affairs, it's like Blue Sky on Twitter, right? Everyone says oh, this is an amazing place now, and it is while it's nice, and then it will be changed, and it won't be. It's just
maybe it won't be, but I want the Cumbria cabal. Tim,
well,
for example, you don't know about Blue Sky because you're not on it yet.
No, I'm not on it. How did you know that? I'm not on it yet. Does that mean you've searched for me?
I've searched for you long and hard. But anyway, many thanks for that question and the other ones, which we'll be coming on to later on. We'll be touching on such diverse topics as massive weekend in WSL, loads of international football. Daniel, perhaps you'll give us a word on your trip to see the biggest men's club game this weekend, Stockport against Wrexham. How did that go?
It was magnificent. I've not been to... Well, the last time I went to Stockport, I stood on a terrace that is now seats, put it that way. So, lovely to go back. I went to watch and interview Louis Barry, who is a young kid on loan from Villa, who was the first ever English player in La Masia. And he scored a magnificent winner after about 25 minutes, at which point I was like, just bring him off now, please. Let's nothing else happen in the game. It's fine. And that's pretty much what did happen. So, great.
Right. 12 goals already for Louis Barry in League One. What's his kind of ceiling, do you think?
It's interesting. I think he is probably... I mean, he can be a Premier League player, no doubt. He's quite small. He studies Jamie Vardy a lot, which is quite interesting given that Vardy was in his 30s. And, Louis Barry's only 21 now. But he has this similar, less so off the ball, but certainly this similar ability to kind of come alive as soon as the ball comes to him. He seems to know what he's going to do every time he gets the ball. His goal was one of those kind of set outside the far post curling shots that everybody else thinks is going wide, apart from him, who's already started celebrating because he's done it before. The physicality will clearly be a thing, but he's always been very highly rated. That's why Barcelona signed him at 16, and why Villa signed him back when COVID broke out and he wanted to come home. But 21 doesn't feel that young anymore. So I suppose there was an offer on the table this summer from a Championship club. He wanted to go back to Stockport for some kind of familiarity, and that seems to have been a really good decision because they're fourth in League One and he's top scorer in League One.
All right, excellent.
Daniel, I'm so happy for you that that's how it unfolded. As a journalist, when you go to a game with an idea in mind, it never, ever, ever comes off that way. But to Louis Barry to score the only goal. Well, I went to Brentford, Bournemouth a couple of weeks ago, planning to write about Eva Nielsen, and he scored the opening goal, and I was like, just blow the full-time whistle now. And then, it ended up being... He barely touched the ball again for the rest of the match, and Brentford won 3-2, so didn't write about him.
Especially because obviously it doesn't really happen in the Premier League like this because of access, but because I was interviewing him afterwards, you kind of if he gets an injury here or he got a yellow before his goal, and I thought, well, if he gets sent off, maybe the club don't want it. Completely understandably, the club or he don't want to do it at that point, and you then have to go away and come back, which is, the gig's the gig. But yes, it was pleasing. All
right, you got the news, and we can read about that as part of your 92 series, I imagine. Is that right?
Yeah, that's going to be out on Thursday, that piece, I think.
Brilliant. Excellent. Ooh, Nations League. That's right. I'm saving that one up. Here's the headlines. 2 spots remain to be filled still over the next couple of days. Which teams are going to be going to join Spain, Germany, Netherlands, now qualified, Italy, France and Portugal in the quarterfinals in March. It's either going to be from one group, Serbia or Denmark. They are meeting in a decider Monday, tonight as we record. The other team in the quarters will be coming from League A Group 1, Portugal's group. Well, get this, Scotland, who hadn't won a competitive game since September 2023 coming into this week, could now make the quarterfinals. Or they could get relegated. It all depends what happens on Monday night. They are away to Poland. They need to win that game and hope that Croatia lose to Portugal, who they're hosting. Croatia, who the Scots beat 1-0 last week. Extraordinary. Lots of other things happening too. We'll be getting on to Scotland very shortly. We'll also be hearing about how France beat Italy 3-1 at San Siro. But biggest of all, England. They've turned it around, everyone. Lee Carsley signing off with promotion for the Three Lions back to the top tier of Nations League football after the 3-0 win over Greece on Thursday, a 5-0 thumping of Republic of Ireland on Sunday. Woof. Taylor Harwood-Bellis with the 5th goal of England's thumping win over Republic of Ireland. Lee Carsley signing off in style there. Tim and Daniel in particular, are we going to miss Lee Carsley?
I do think it's persuaded me that having every time a long-term manager gets sacked, an international manager gets sacked, having a guy who you bring in for 6 months is actually, I think, really a good idea, in that it gives you time to do the search for the manager you really want and who really wants the job. And also, as has happened under Lee Carsley, it allows them pressure-free to pick a load of young players. And even if it doesn't work out, yes, we did have some caterwailing after the Greece defeat, but that's because we didn't know who was going to get the job after Carsley at that point, and we thought he was a contender. But it's created a situation where there is now greater strength and depth than even we knew before, and we knew there was plenty before Carsley came in. You know, Curtis Jones and Conor Gallagher coming back in, and as you mentioned, Taylor Harwood-Bellis coming in and scoring, starting Ollie Watkins over Kane, starting Anthony Gordon regularly on the left, Morgan Gibbs-White in the squad. You know, there's so many different options. The 2 Newcastle fullbacks against Ireland. These options are now something that Thomas Tuchel will have to wrestle with, and in a way potentially makes it slightly more complicated for him, because he now, it seems, has a contract for one major tournament, and he has to decide whether he goes risk averse, as generally happens with managers in their last tournament, or feel on the good team young squad vibes. And it's refreshed everything in a way that had to happen, so I'm really glad it did.
Okay, lots of people asking what's going to happen to the 8 players that Carsley gave first starts to. What do you think, Tim?
I think 2 or 3 have sort of maybe solidified their place in the squad. Lewis Hall being one. I think he's the 8th left back to play for England in the last year, and he's already ahead of quite a few of those. I think, well, obviously Trippier's gone. I think you'd say it's maybe time for Shaw and Chilwell to go. Certainly Chilwell. He's also played Trent Alexander-Arnold there, and Tamori was one of those as well. So you know, you can instantly say that Lewis Hall is now a pretty decent shot to come in at left back, or certainly be in the squad. Madueke's certainly sort of announced himself on the international stage. I thought Angel Gomez was really good as well, and Curtis Jones was probably the standout player of this international break. So yeah, the reactions to Carsley have been so extreme. If you remember, after those first 2 games, it was generally considered by quite a lot of people that it was his job to lose. So sort of efficient with England.
Which he then did.
Yeah. But yeah, and then obviously it was a disaster against Greece, and that's when Tuchel came in, and now it's generally considered he's probably done a good job.
Right.
I think.
Okay, so at the end of the Lee Carsley, the England years, what are the graphics over the closing credits? Lee Carsley went on to.
I think it's job done. You've got to recognise the inferior opponents here. I mean, you know, Finland aren't up to much at all. Greece are obviously very good at Wembley. Ireland's pool of players is from not a higher level than it used to be. But the way he's brought in young players, obviously it's job done in terms of promotion. I think he's shown himself to be a progressive manager with inventive ideas, who now shouldn't have too many problems getting a top-end championship job. I mean, I don't know if with his Coventry links he's in the running for that job at the moment, or if that's something that interests him. Probably not, because he's going back to the under-21s. But you could imagine him going in there and doing a pretty good job. You know, someone who promotes young players as well. He clearly didn't seem to enjoy himself too much. He was asked for his overriding emotion at the end of the game yesterday, and he said relief. And I think, yeah, part of that's relief in terms of job done, promotion, but also the fact that he's not doing it anymore. He did give me strong Rishi Sunak vibes pre-election, kind of knowing that this isn't going to be his job for very long, and hates dealing with the media, and was willing to experiment with some quite extreme policies / selections, knowing that they were going to be reversed by whoever comes in anyway. But yeah, he'll be remembered. Like I say, job done, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's the paradox that England have here, right? That you've got a squad of 22 players for this international break, 14 of whom are in single figures for caps. So this is a squad that pretty much never played under Gareth Southgate, more or less. And you've got now a manager coming in who's in, as Daniel mentioned, he's only in for the World Cup. His objective is simple: win the World Cup. It's not looking beyond that. The contract is relatively short term. If he doesn't win that tournament, harshly or otherwise, that will be deemed as a failure to meet that objective. But Thomas Tuchel isn't a project manager. He's not going to be the guy that comes in to bring more players through and to develop them for future Euros, future World Cups. He's here to win now. That was the purpose of that appointment. And this squad selection, albeit with a lot of injury withdrawals, is quite striking to say, well, actually, I was the guy that was bringing players in who hadn't had that opportunity before.
All right. Well, apposite to that, if that's the correct usage of the word, after Lavenham teacher Michael Sugden and Bristol John all asked about which players who've come in under Carsley are going to maybe stick around. Conversely, Tom Waterman saying, which England player who wasn't there have we missed the least? Says Tom, I can't imagine anyone in the country has watched the 8 goals going on this week and thought, I wish Phil Foden was on the pitch. Who do you think? Who was missed the least, Daniel Storey?
That is the eternal question, yes. I actually think, weirdly, although I would still definitely start him, I thought Noni Madueke played so well that we actually, in replicating what Bukayo Saka does, that I actually think we didn't really miss Saka, which is brilliant because he's a player we've had to flog as the kind of creative outlet on that side so much because there isn't really anyone else that does that. Madueke has stepped in and done that. That's brilliant. But I mean, the general sentiment is, I don't think when it comes to it and you're Thomas Tuchel and let's say the World Cup semi-final is tomorrow, Noni Madueke's played brilliantly this week. Do you then think, well, Madueke's in form, so I don't pick Saka? I still think you pick Saka. I still think you pick Kane. I still think you probably pick Foden. That's the really tough decision to make because if it goes wrong with the kids, you're almost castigated more than if you didn't pick the senior players and lost because you're seen to have taken an undue risk. Whereas when you pick the senior players and lose, you can at least say, well, these are the best players I've got. These have proven themselves to be the best players. It's really, really difficult. I do think that now there is a sense, and it built up in the World Cup with Cole Palmer as well, that there is sense in the rest of the squad outside the first team being young and hungry. In the past, England have had dependables in the rest of the squad, like good tournament players, good travellers, good tourists. I think now you would have exciting kids on the bench rather than tried and tested.
I think the Harry Kane interviews throughout this international period have been really revealing. Obviously, last week when he kind of complained about players are pulling out through injury, they're not committed, and actually openly questioning a lot of his teammates who would have played alongside for years. I thought that was quite interesting, but also what he had to say about Thomas Tuchel. Obviously, having worked alongside him at Bayern, he's like, there's going to be players that don't like this. They won't like his directness of sort of maybe just not putting the arm around the shoulder, of actually going in and being like, this is what you've got to do and this is what you've got to do differently. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, if that actually does manifest itself, in the sense that Tuchel's not going to be afraid to leave big name players out, or certainly he has more of a personality and a track record whereby I think he can get away with doing that. He can be like, well, look at what I've done and won in the club game. I've got the sort of weight behind me to make those decisions. Maybe that wasn't the case with either Gareth Southgate or Lee Carsley, who essentially haven't really got a track record of success in any other environment. So maybe on that strand, you could see players like Curtis Jones and Angel Gomez and a lot of the new defenders coming in and actually, if they fit a certain profile, to be actually given a chance rather than we saw for years that, shoehorning so many creative players into a team and they're obviously not comfortable in that role in the team. I think that was probably what was holding England back. So that will be obviously the biggest question for Tuchel to address, and he's got the sort of kudos to do it.
Right, and he's also got some friendlies coming up in March as opposed to a playoff, which he would have been facing if they hadn't conquered the group. Daniel?
Yeah, Collin mentioned central midfield there. That's for me the area where this is most fascinating, not just because that's where Southgate got the most criticism in terms of balance, I think unfairly because of how the rest of the team was playing creatively. But you've got Rice and Bellingham, you've got Wharton and Mainoo who are at the Euros, you've now got Gallagher, who I think was England's best player during this break, you've got Angel Gomez, you've got Kobbie Mainoo. There's so many options there, and it is going to be, when I said earlier about Carsley's, the way he's brought through players actually complicates it a bit. I think that is relevant because if you're Tuchel picking that next squad, you're going to have to leave out probably 2 or 3 of those players I've just mentioned, and that is going to be, it's incredibly crucial in an 18-month contract that you start quickly. So even though he's got those friendlies, like you say, England almost have to start at sprinting speed. Otherwise, everyone thinks kind of, geez, we've only got 8 months to sort this all out before the only tournament the manager's been allotted.
Wow. All right, then. Greece, who England beat last Thursday, were 2-0 winners in Finland on Sunday night, but they go into the promotion-relegation playoff, as do Republic of Ireland, except theirs is going to be to avoid relegation to League C. There you go. Lots of other things happened around Nations League football land. We'll get on to other things next. Other things, everybody. Collin, Northern Ireland. Last time you were here, you mentioned the fact that they literally never scored goals. Blow me. Since then, Michael O'Neill's side have beaten Bulgaria and Belarus by an aggregate score of 7-0. Woof. They've got Luxembourg Monday night.
Yeah. They've had a good group. If they get a point away to Luxembourg, it will seal promotion back to League B. Michael O'Neill was saying that in his first campaign as manager, which was the qualification for the 2014 World Cup, so going back over a decade now, and the sort of nadir of that campaign was a loss away to Luxembourg, and he said it was like a bad date because he was trying to impress the fans, and it just all went wrong, and everyone was thinking, like, this just isn't going to work out, is it? Should we really bother with another one? And then obviously the following campaign, they did qualify for Euro 2016, so he learned a lot from that. And yeah,
was that his first game in charge then?
It was his first campaign in charge was for that 2014 World Cup, and that was the loss away to Luxembourg was sort of like, well, yeah, we really aren't very good at the minute, are we? But he did bounce back, and obviously to sort of gain the status that he did among the fans. This is a totally different squad, of course. And what's been really interesting with this campaign is that it's a very young squad. There's 11 players in it who are 21 or under. So there's a lot of players that are coming through. But what Michael O'Neill's done that I think has been particularly interesting is that in each of the 3 international breaks, he's made a different player the captain. So in the first break, it was Conor Bradley, and then it was Try Hume, the Sunderland defender, and now it's been Shea Charles, who has at Sheffield Wednesday this season. And again, they're all 21, 22 years old. So it's obviously a team that is coming together, and there's obviously going to be mistakes, but I think this is a good group to be in because I think Bulgaria are probably the strongest of those 3 teams, but Bulgaria, Belarus and Luxembourg are teams in Northern Ireland, despite that lack of experience, should be beating. And that 5-0 win over Bulgaria, whenever Isaac Price scored a hat-trick, that was such an unusual game, just in the sense that you could see the confidence flowing, and that is something that hasn't ever really been the case for Northern Ireland. So being in League C has actually sort of given it a new lease of life, has allowed these players to come through under a bit less pressure, but also to have an environment around the squad where obviously there are quite a few captains and there's quite a few leaders already.
Magnificent. Let's hope that Monday night's date ends with lots of scoring as well. Wales, still unbeaten. Under their exciting manager, Craig Bellamy, they had a 0-0 draw, Wales, with Turkey in the Animal Kingdoms Collide Classico. That was last week. They've got Iceland coming up Tuesday. They're 2 points behind Turkey, so they could still win their group. If they beat Iceland and Montenegro beat Turkey. Ooh, crikey. They'd actually be level, of course, with Turkey going into this if they hadn't thrown away a 2-0 lead in Reykjavik last month. But there you go. Never mind. Hopefully it'll go better at home for Wales. Scotland, meanwhile, as mentioned earlier, could incredibly make the quarterfinals. Roulang writing in. Well done, Steve Clark, says Roulang, for keeping within touching distance going into the last game. They only ever lost by the odd goal. They've had big players missing all campaign. Ferguson, Hickey and Tierney all to come back. So, yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it, given how much despondency there was surrounding the Scotland camp, that turns out, what a final twist, they could yet get the quarterfinals.
Yeah, from nowhere, really. That incredible backs to the wall draw against Portugal, Hampden, could really sort of change their fortunes.
So they've got a win or bust game
in
Warsaw on Monday night. Last time they had one of those was, remind me, third group game of the World Cup. How did that go for them? Oh, third group game of the Euros. How'd that go for them?
Yeah, but they didn't have Ben Doak that night, did they?
Oh, tell us about Ben Doak.
Yeah, he's a pretty intriguing, exciting young player who many people are questioning whether he is Scottish or not. You know, those types on social media, not on Blue Sky, because I'm not on there, Jimbo, as you know. But yeah, he's got a bit of a Rooney about him. He's a bit of a street footballer, fighter, fearless approach, a bit old school. I really like his attitude. He's talking to social media. He's not on there because he said it's exhausting. And yeah, he was asked after the Croatia win because he sort of gave Gvardiol a torrid evening, as he sort of had done in the game away in Croatia actually. And he was asked about it. He said, "I don't see faces on the park. I just see a kit and a blank face." It's a very kind of mature attitude for a teenager. But yeah, I don't think he's been pulling up trees.
He's just got terrible eyesight.
Could be. I don't think he's been massively pulling up trees at Middlesbrough. But there's been a lot of excitement about him for a couple of years now since Jurgen Klopp brought him through, I think, one pre-season at Liverpool. But he's really suffered with injuries, including one which kept him out the Euros in the summer. He was in the preliminary squad for Scotland. But yeah, he's all pace, he's dribbling, his tricks, a little bit tentative in the final third sometimes. But I think the hype around him is probably justified. It's quite rare for Scotland to have a player like that, a really fast, tricky winger with lots of skill. It's hard to really recall the last one.
I'm thinking about a fellow who used to ply his trade down the King's Road, but I'm sure there have been others since, no?
But certainly throughout the 90s and 2000s, it's all, it's...
Kevin Gallagher?
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at Kevin Gallagher. I don't know, was he a tricky winger?
He was at Blackburn. Well, yeah, maybe a bit more centrally for Scotland. But
John McGinn, not a tricky winger, but devastatingly effective. Only 4 players have ever scored more goals for Scotland than McGinn. He got his 19th for Scotland on Friday night with the only goal against Croatia. There you go. So it all comes down to what happens for them away in Poland and Croatia in their clash with Portugal. You've been watching Portugal, who been so impressive, no? And Cristiano Ronaldo, with that brace, yes, one was a penalty, but the other was an actual bona fide overhead kick.
Yeah, so they were 4-0 up at this point, and then Vitinha, who came on and changed the game at half-time, it was 0-0 at half-time, quite similar to the England-Ireland game, and then Portugal ran out.
This was against Poland.
Sorry, yeah, Poland at home, and they ran out 5-1 winners. Vitinha came on and really sort of changed the tempo. He came off with Joe Neves, who had a really disappointing first half, and Vitinha was sort of all very sort of positive, progressive passes, winning the ball and raising the tempo. Anyway, it was, his floated cross for Ronaldo, 6-yard box, it's floated. He could probably head it, but then he just changes his body position completely and sticks an overhead kick in the top corner. It was great. And yeah, Portugal look really good. They've changed things around a bit since the Euros, when, I don't know if you remember, Roberto Martinez was tinkering a lot with the formation, even during the tournament, sort of switching to 3 at the back, not knowing what his best team or formation was. But he's gone 4-3-3 for the last few games with Rafael Leao and Pedro Neto as the 2 wingers. Really sort of fast-paced, exciting. Leao and Nuno Mendes down the left have formed a pretty electric partnership, albeit only against Poland. And that is the thing to say with Portugal, that their group contains Croatia, Scotland and Poland, who were probably 3 of the most disappointing teams at the Euros, I would say. So you do have to take that into account, as always with Portugal. But Martinez is building something for the longer term. He's expected to give Giovanni Quenda his debut tonight, the sporting wonder kid, and also Fabio Silva, the once Porto/Wolves wonder kid, because Portugal have topped the group, so he's already sent Ronaldo, Bernardo Silva and Pedro Neto home, and Bruno Fernandes is suspended. So it's going to be a much changed team against Croatia tonight, which is not good news for Scotland.
Not good news for Scotland, no, indeed.
Just quickly on Cristiano Ronaldo, I know this isn't news that he scores a lot of goals, but since he celebrated his 30th birthday, he has 83 international goals. Now,
83 since turning 30?
Since turning 30. The highest for any European player throughout their whole career, other than Ronaldo, on international football is Romelu Lukaku, who has 85. So Ronaldo's record post-30 is
How many games, Collin, do you know?
99 matches.
99 matches?
If my maths is correct.
Right. Amazing.
So that's a pretty good goal return. I mean, it's a good goal ratio, of course. And I mean, look, obviously, that record might go with know players like Erling Haaland coming through. They obviously scored a lot of goals internationally. There's more international games than ever before. But that is still an astonishing return. I mean, because everyone assumes that, when you turn 30, that's when players start to wind down. Certainly the case for maybe players like Rooney or Hazard or even Neymar. But yeah, to have that to have that strike rate is genuinely astonishing, I think.
You mentioned Haaland. He scored another hat-trick the other day. 38 and 39 now for Norway, who've topped their group. So
they're coming up to B.
They're coming up to A.
Oh, they're coming up to A, sorry.
So he'll be facing the likes of Italy, France, Portugal, Germany, etc., perhaps in 2 years' time. But yeah, he's now scored more international goals than Maradona, Benzema, George Weah, Hadji, Shearer.
Right.
I could put Shearer in that list. Shearer. So yeah, remarkable.
And Norway, I know we've mentioned this before about the attacking players they have, but there's another teenage player that's coming through who's really good in these games, Antonio Nusa. Who had joined RB Leipzig this summer from Club Brugge, but he had been linked a lot to the Premier League. And what was particularly interesting about that was Brentford actually had a deal in place with about 30 million. It would have been, I think, a club record. But the move sort of broke down later on. I think there was some sort of concern over a potential underlying injury he may have had, and that sort of put off Chelsea and Tottenham, who'd both been in France as well. But he was really, really good in these games, and he scored 3 goals in the international break, and he's sort of seen as the next big thing. But Norway are probably the international team with the most imbalanced squad. Just the attacking talent they have it's a lot of fun to watch. I don't know how successful it will be, but they're a fun team.
Daniel Storey.
While we're talking about the world's informed strikers scoring lots of goals in this international tournament, Chris Wood scored 5 for New Zealand over the 2 games. I wouldn't say top level opponents, Vanuatu and Samoa, but as a Forest fan, there is something sort of slightly wincing about our brilliant 30-something-year-old striker travelling 12,000 miles to just sort of pop and crisp goals against Samoa and Vanuatu, but he seems to absolutely love it. He's up to 41 international goals now. He sort of went through a period of time where I don't know. He seems to really love playing for New Zealand again now, put it that way. So, yes, he will be travelling back to Nottingham shortly.
Excellent. We should mention that on Monday night, San Marino will also be looking for promotion to League C. They just need to beat Liechtenstein, who they'll be visiting. If they don't win that game, it'll be Gibraltar who comes up. Mark Adamson says, even though they conceded a 91st minute penalty to draw with San Marino the other night, that is now 5 games unbeaten for Gibraltar, all thanks to the Nations League. Well done, Nations League.
Yeah, very quick. And that Group D is the best thing about the Nations League. I think just having those teams playing against each other, it gives them meaning. You know what I mean? Like, it gives these players a reason to turn up to these games instead of getting thrashed routinely in a qualification campaign, and it'll raise the standards. And it's the most entertaining.
All right, now they can get thrashed in the division above, like perhaps Bosnia and Herzegovina, who got done 7-0 by Germany, or the Netherlands, who pumped their rivals for a qualifying spot for the quarterfinals, Hungary, 4-0. The other night. Anyway, anything else you want to say about this Nations League break before we get on to France-Italy, Tim?
It's good, isn't it? I like it. I was thinking exactly of the meme that you or totally
Producer Charlie,
yeah, put out, the Alan Partridge. Can I shock you? I like the Nations League. That's exactly what I was thinking the other day. It's been the quarterfinals are going to be great as well, which is something we don't really get in international football.
We've not had quarterfinals in the Nations League before, have we?
No, this is a new thing, and it's going to be 2 legs, home and away. Some of the big boys playing each other. It's potentially the group winners would be Portugal, France, Germany, and Spain. Will play against the runners-up, who at the moment are sort of Italy, probably the Netherlands, Croatia, and Denmark,
or Scotland.
But there's that kind of home and away in quick succession over 4 days. You don't get that between the big boys in international football. It's not something we've really had before over 2 legs. So I think that those games will be really exciting. But yeah, also
wait till you see the Club World Cup. You're going to love that.
No, but there's so much sort of jeopardy for all these teams in actual competitive football that a lot of nations are taking really seriously. And like you say, San Marino and Scotland, and there's a lot of good stories.
I do think it's a very sort of England-centric viewpoint where the international breaks are terrible. It's like, well, actually, these breaks from most of these countries playing, that is as good if not better than club football.
I hear you. I think it's because the interest in the Premier League is so strong that there's that kind of tantric frustration when you're just getting to the edge of something and we stop to introduce a whole new topic. But hey, speaking of which, we should stop and introduce a whole new topic right after this. Julien Laurens joins us to talk about France, Italy, and one or two other French football-related topics. It's the 18th of November as we record this list. Now, on this day, in 2009, what happened, Tim Spiers?
2009. Oh, would that have been...
Oh, is he going to get it?
Would that, if it's international break, would that have been 2010 World Cup qualifying?
Yes, and...
Was that the handball?
It was the handball. Did you peek?
No, honestly, no. Generally not.
That's impressive.
Hand on heart.
Maybe you got it as well, listener. Thierry Henry, of course, the owner of the hand in question, using it to steer the ball to William Gallas, who scored the goal that secured France's path to the World Cup in South Africa, where, of course, they made the best of every opportunity that hand had afforded them. What a terrific World Cup they had. Is it true that people stopped buying Henry Hoovers in Ireland as a result of that? Is that true?
I hope it's true. I can't remember if it's true. I do remember that Irish government officials were calling for FIFA to expand the World Cup to 33 teams, which was quite fun. Considering the Republic of Ireland never actually were ahead in that playoff tie and it was going to penalties. But the fallout from that was extraordinary. But yeah, it was one of those iconic moments of just how did that happen. If only football had a system which could retrospectively intervene.
Chuckle. What are France up to now? Well, this Sunday, they went to San Siro and beat Italy 3-1. Woof. Let's hear more about that and one or two other exciting French football-related topics that are in the news right now with Julien Laurence. Jules, sounds like you're still celebrating France's first competitive win over Italy in 18 years.
Sorry for the noise behind me, Jimbo, but yeah, it's a pretty good Monday morning after what we saw on Sunday night in Milan. Not that the French were that super convincing with the ball, let's be honest, because we scored 3 goals on set pieces, 2 corners from Ding and 2 headers from Rabiot, and then a direct free kick from Ding. The last time France scored 3 goals on set pieces in the same game was back in 1991 against Albania, and the last time one player scored 2 headers for France in the same game, Jimbo, that was the 1998 World Cup final, and that was Zinedine Zidane. So we're not there yet, but at least to beat Italy and with the 2-goal margin means that we top the group in the Nations League. To finish top is great, but there's still a lot of work to do, I think.
Okay. Rabiot with the 2 headers, as you mentioned, the other goal going down as a Vicario own goal, making own goal France's second top scorer in 2024. Own goals scored more than Kylian Mbappe, for example. How is Kylian doing, and is there any clearer picture now of why he wasn't part of the France party?
Well, he seems to be watching the game. He certainly sent a message on social media to support the boys, so that was good. Deschamps was opened up a little bit more on why he was not with the squad, saying that he didn't really have the headspace that right now psychologically and physically he's not ready to be with France. I think meaning that he's going through a difficult time, which he is, to be fair. It's a tough patch in his career, maybe the first real difficult time since he broke through as a youngster from Monaco. And that's why Deschamps didn't pick him. I want to believe him when he says that, and I want to believe that this break without the national team and staying at Madrid and training and feeling better will be beneficial for him. I still think that France would have been better, even last night with Mbappe in the team more than without. But what we saw yesterday in Milan, in that game, James, was an incredible team spirit from this team, the unity, the cohesion within the team that sometimes we don't have when Kylian plays, because it's very much him and another 10 players. This time everybody fought for each other, they played for each other, they were hungry, and they played as a proper team. And I think when he comes back in March, he will have to be part of that as well, not just him and the others.
Turning out to be quite a chastening year, this, for Kylian in some ways. Italy, by the way, that's now 6 goals they conceded from set pieces in their last 4 games. So this is very much an ongoing theme for them. Beyond the triumph for France and the fact that you topped the group and will therefore, I think, play the second leg at home in the quarterfinals, for what that's worth, can we get a quick reaction to a couple of other things? First of all, Paul Pogba ending his contract with Juventus by mutual agreement. What does this mean? Where are we likely to see him now, do you think?
I mean, we expected it, Jimbo, didn't we? We said it with Horny as well a few weeks ago, that it looked very likely that Juve would finish his contract. Thiago Motta has arrived. He built a squad and a midfield without Pogba in it because at the time he was banned for 4 years. And I think for Pogba, it's good to have a fresh start. Wherever he goes next, it's probably good to have a fresh start. So they found an agreement, which is good. Pogba is in Miami right now, training on his own. And from January the 1st, he can train with a new team and then can start playing on March the 1st. So it's a new time for him, which I think is really good. Ideally, he wants to stay in one of the big 5 European leagues and play at competitive level in a good team with a good project to make the 2026 World Cup. But I think that everything is on the table, from MLS to Saudi to pretty much anything. Really just so desperate to play again, but ideally in his mind, have a good club in one of the big 5 leagues is his preference.
Okay, but no concrete moves yet, 6
Not
weeks
yet,
away
no,
from
but there's
him.
a few teams already who've approached him, and I think he expects to have a few offers on the table and decide which one is the best.
Any names, Jules, you tease?
No, because I really don't think anything is concrete enough, Jimbo, to name anyone. But so he'll be 32 in March. So I know it's not the youngest, obviously, and he hasn't played for 18 months, and we don't know in what kind of shape he is. I mean, I've seen him recently, so I can tell you he's in really good shape, but we haven't seen him play in a match, for example. We know that he's trained on his own, does a lot of gym work, does a lot of ball work as well with his personal coaches and everything, but in a team environment, we don't know yet, really. So I can understand why it's a bit of a gamble for some clubs. However, if you get Pogba ready to go, fully fit, hungry, I think it's a gamble worth taking. So that's why I expect a few clubs to be there waiting for his decision and trying to get him to their clubs.
Sounds exciting. All right, just to finish off then, what about the extraordinary news about Lyon, currently lying 5th in Ligue 1 and on the rise with the Spiers, but now the word is that they might be relegated for financial irregularities at the end of the season, Jules?
Yeah, that's the big news of last week as well, Jimbo. What was funny was John Textor, the Lyon owner, when he left the meeting with the DNCG, so the French Financial Fair Play, to put it simply, he waved at the journalist and said, it was all great, they're great people, we got on so well, it's perfect, no problem. And a couple of hours later, the statement was released from the DNCG saying that they were, as a provision, it's not definitive, but that they will be relegated to Ligue 2 next season unless they find 100 million euros, which is not easy to find.
100 million euros?
Yeah, I think at the heart of the problem, Jimbo, is that John Textor, as an American businessman that he is, would like basically quite a lot of fluidity between all the clubs that he owns. So for example, he said to the DNCG, listen, I own Botafogo, I'm going to sell some players from Botafogo, and the money that I get from those sales, I'm going to bring it to Lyon. And the DNCG said, hang on, this is not how business works. We don't do that in football. You know, they're two different things, they're two different clubs. The same way he said, I'm going to sell my shares in Crystal Palace, he owns 45% of Crystal Palace, and then I'm going to use that money to plug the deficit in Lyon. And again, the DNCG said, no, that's not what we do. So the following day of the meeting with the DNCG, he held a massive press conference with for 2 hours where he spoke to the French media, when he said, like, the DNCG have their own system, it's really weird, this is not how I do business. Basically saying, like, I want to use money from my other clubs to be able to put that money in Lyon, which is not going to happen. So I think they're going to sell a few players. They have a big squad at Lyon. They're going to get some money like that. They're going to make some cuts. But even if it's not too worrying, because I don't think they will go down, it's still not a good look on your team off the pitch when you're doing so well on the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. So the likes of Malik Fofana or maybe Ryan Cherki could be making a move. Do you think even maybe in January?
Maybe some guys that play less. You know, maybe a Said Benrahma, for example, who hasn't really worked out since he moved from West Ham. The kinds of players like him, I think maybe Aurel Mangala, again, that came from Everton. Some of those guys, I think, probably could be sold in January, more than a Cherki, who's the best player right now. Malik Fofana as well. It's more Wilfried Zaha has come over on loan from Turkey. He's been absolutely dreadful since he moved from Galatasaray, so they're probably going to cut that loan. So things like that, I think, where they're going to make some money.
Julien Laurens. Collin, you were writing about the Lyon news, which is pretty dramatic stuff.
Yeah, and French football does have a tendency to actually follow through with these threats. But obviously we saw with Bordeaux most recently, who were relegated from the 2nd division to the 4th, and they're should probably be a Champions League club. It also happened to Sochaux quite recently as well.
Andy Carroll's Bordeaux, of course.
Yes, Andy Carroll's Bordeaux, of course. So yeah, and this is an issue. This is an issue I think specific to French football. Of course, it has much wider reaches, but a lot of French football teams are now become part of these sort of multi-club ownership models. And John Textor, the owner of Lille, they're part of his sort of Eagle football group, is his viewpoint essentially is that if he sells his stake in Crystal Palace, or if they register sales from Botafogo, that can then go into his sort of centralized account that he can be like, well, this then shows that our finances are actually okay to finance this club. So there's all these questions that have and a lot of chickens coming home to roost, I think, for these issues. I think this might be the beginning of things starting to unravel on that particular front. But you look at how much money Lyon have spent recently, and it's sort of just like all these warnings were in place, but the spending continues.
Right. And
And then when they publish the accounts showing these pretty big losses and this growing debt, and then they just sort of step in and think, well, you can't just keep doing this. This is the sort of retrospective punishment that could be coming.
Daniel.
So, yeah, I mean, forgive me for resorting to absolute cliche here, but for this summer they spent £60 million basically in completing a loan deal for Aurel Mangala from Forest and for signing Moussa Niakhaté from Forest. And I mean, even the most optimistic, upbeat Forest fans would have had to, you'd have had to persuade them that those two players were worth £60 million together. So the fact that those deals went through just smacked of a kind of desperation. And as Collin said, exactly this time when people knew about these problems, like this has not been a huge shock. The extent of them might be, but yeah, really worrying stuff.
At a time when, as Jules mentioned, French football is still reeling from the collapse of the TV rights deal as well. All right, well, let's move on to a league that's booming, and that's WSL. We're joined next by Megan Feringa. Megan, thank you so much for being with us on the back of a particularly huge weekend in WSL. Everton getting their first win, as usual in the derby. Chelsea continuing their incredible run under Sonia Bonpastor. And Arsenal doing nicely too. But let's kick off with the Merseyside derby. And how was your afternoon at Goodison?
Oh, it was cold and it was wet, but it was great. It was such a Goodison Park day. It was really nice. It was really nice to see kind of a final Everton women game at Goodison too, and like you could tell that the fans really wanted it, and to see them win in that way, and they've never won at Goodison Park, so to beat Liverpool, to do it in your final attempt at Goodison Park, and to get your first win of the WSL season, I mean, it was a very special occasion.
Excellent. When you say win in that way, in what way did they win, Megan?
Very controversially. It was, I mean, it should never have been a penalty. It was a very poor call, and it definitely brings up the question of just officiating in the women's league, not having VAR, which kind of potentially undermines the competitive value. But at the end of the day, Liverpool had 17 chances to try to breach Everton. They didn't. Everton's defense is very, very good, other than maybe I think it was a 5-0 loss to Chelsea and a 4-0 loss to Brighton. They've only conceded at minimum one goal in the last couple games. So they're very hard to break down when they don't want to be broken down. So Matt Beard said it before going into the game. He said, we can't let them score first. And ironically, they scored first. And yeah, it just sort of unfolded the way you would expect it to.
How was Olivia Smith's afternoon? You did a lovely interview with her during the week.
Yeah, I think she had a difficult time because I think Everton just targeted her. They knew what she could bring, and Everton's defense, their center backs did a particularly good job at just making sure that there were no balls in behind. They used a lot of strength against her, and you could tell she was just kind of getting frustrated. But the entire Liverpool squad, they had lots of misplaced passes. You could tell what they were trying to do, but they just weren't on it. And I think the occasion might have gotten to them.
It moves Everton off the bottom of the table at last, but they're still very much in the mix. There's only 1 point between the bottom 5 there in the WSL. Up at the top, title race looks like being very much a two-team story, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say that at the moment, unless Manchester City or Chelsea kind of fumble at all and Arsenal can catch up, I think Arsenal's start to the season potentially just sort of takes them out of the running at the moment. But Chelsea, I mean, they what a win for them over the weekend. It's a bit of a shame because it was supposed to be the sort of Goliath versus Goliath. But when one of those Goliaths is missing arguably its best player, it does kind of dampen the whole thing.
So Chelsea now 2 points clear with a game in hand of Man City, and for a club that had just waved goodbye to the iconic, the architect of their incredible run, Emma Hayes. It calls to mind a little bit what's happening at Liverpool with Arne Slot following on from Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, it's ironic that last season the narrative was this is why you should never tell your players that you're leaving early because then you end up not getting the treble or the quadruple that you want. And now it's like, oh, this is why you should just get a new manager because look how great it's all going. So, yeah, Chelsea have been unbelievable so far. It's been really impressive to see. And I think the last couple of weeks, the narrative around Chelsea has been they're winning, but they don't even look like they're at full tilt yet. And I think against Manchester City, they showed what they're capable of doing.
All 10, is it all 10 matches they've won now under Sonia Bonpastor?
Yeah, it's a perfect start. She's the first WSL manager to win 7 WSL games or her first WSL games. And then also, too, from last season, Chelsea under Emma Hayes, they lost against Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal. And now Sonia Bombastor has beaten Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal, and they've scored 7 goals and conceded just 1. So that, to me, is just such a great visual of what she's been doing at the club and like her impact there.
Okay. They've lost another player to an ACL injury, though.
Yeah, Khadijah Buchanan is out. She wasn't in the squad, and there were a few rumors going pre-match, and they confirmed it after the match. And that is going to be a really big loss for them. But the fact that they still managed to contain Bunny Shaw the way they did, and then they still managed to put in the performance that they did, I think it's testament to just how the strength and depth that they have. And that's what you do need. I think Chelsea are very well aware of what happens when you have ACL injuries to some key players. Sam Kerr was out in January and they still managed to win the league. So this isn't necessarily an arena where they are unfamiliar.
Okay. Chelsea doing well under their new manager, and so are Arsenal. You mentioned the start wasn't perfect for them, but recent form has been, the past week's been remarkable from them. The 5-0 against Brighton, 4-0 in the Champions League against Juventus, and then a big win at the weekend in the North London derby.
Yeah, the irony with Arsenal is that before Renee Slegers came in, before Jonas Eidevall left, was that they couldn't score. They just had no confidence in front of goal. Alessia Russo, I think she went 8 games, competitive games under Jonas Eidevall and couldn't score. And now she scored 4 goals in her last 5 appearances under Renee Slegers. So if that's not a really good visual of just kind of the impact that's been happening there, I'm not sure what is. I'm not sure if that comes down strictly to Renee Slegers or if it's just what happens when players feel like they've got a bit more freedom or like just don't have the manager on top of them anymore. But clearly something is happening there. I don't know what Arsenal do in terms of if they give it to Renee Slegers till the end of the season or if they continue looking for a new manager. But there's obviously a very big positive in that conversation around keeping her in charge.
Next up for Arsenal, Thursday, they welcome Juventus, which is going to be interesting.
Before we went into the last international break, Jonas Eidevall stepped down from his position. There was a lot of uncertainty around Arsenal, and now they could go into an international break looking like a totally different type of beast. So this would be a really, really big statement from Arsenal if they go into Thursday and claim a very big victory.
Okay. 4-0 last time. That game coming up, as you say, Thursday night. Megan, thank you so much for being with us today. Look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Megan. Lovely stuff. Anything else we want to talk about before we wrap the show up? Colin?
Very quickly on Lionel Messi,
who
has lost 3 matches in a row. One for Argentina, obviously the 2 MLS playoff games for Inter Miami. He's never lost 4 games in a row in his career. And he could replicate Pep Guardiola. It's unlikely, but Argentina are at home to Peru this week in the CONMEBOL qualifiers. And that would be the first time in his career he could potentially lose 4 in a row. Wow. And there is a Peruvian defender called Luis Abram who played in both of the MLS playoff games for Atlanta against Inter Miami. So he could potentially be involved in making a little bit of history this week. It is unlikely. Peru are second from bottom in the group and Argentina are top. But you never know.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
You know what else we should mention from CONMEBOL is the moment of the international break so far. This was Venezuela against Brazil. Did you see this?
No.
So I'm going to set the scene for you. Venezuela, well, they're the only team in South American qualifying never to reach a World Cup, but they've had a couple of wins so far, so they're sort of in the mix. But they've got Brazil at home. It's 1-1, latest stage of the game. Venezuela are down to 10 men. They've saved a penalty as well. They're really sort of hanging on, basically, to this precious point at home to Brazil. It's the 94th minute. Brazil have got a corner. Venezuela are doing everything they can to stop Brazil from scoring.
Are they time wasting, Tim?
They are not time wasting. But what do? They set the sprinklers off.
Yes.
So the players to be stopped. Brazil players going mad. But yeah, it's too late. Game over, 1-1.
Brilliant.
What a way to win a point.
Are you a big fan of a sprinkler story? The other one would be Barcelona putting them on for Jose Mourinho's Inter, no? Back in their Champions League winning run.
When they were celebrating.
They were celebrating. Admittedly, the game had finished,
yeah.
but yeah. We didn't see it. They'd cut away to the two managers shaking hands, of course.
It's so annoying.
Or not in the case of Jose Mourinho.
Yeah, indeed so. CONMEBOL, there's also AFCON qualifying, and listener, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that amongst qualifying games this weekend for the tournament, which begins in over a year's time, December 21st, 2005 in Morocco, we saw Ghana drawing 1-1. Collin with who?
Against Angola.
And that means that for the first time in 2 decades, in 10 editions of AFCON Cup of Nations, they are not going to be there.
Which is extraordinary when you look at how many teams are going to be there, and the squad that they have, like 7 or 8 players in the Premier League, and certainly the rest of the squad at sort of relatively top level of European football. Obviously, that's the sort of bad story in that group, but the story of Sudan is absolutely remarkable.
So we mentioned this on Thursday that they were poised to go to their first tournament in, I think, 2 decades. Is that right?
Yeah, the first time since 2012, I think they were last.
Okay, so 1 decade.
But they won. Sudan won AFCON in 1970 when they hosted it. They've only been past the group stage once since then, so haven't been a force in African football, and their squad is entirely comprised of African-based players. Obviously, that's amid the backdrop of a pretty vicious civil war, not being able to play games at home. They're playing games in Libya, their home matches, and their players have sort of been speaking out and saying that actually one of the big advantages they've had is that they've had 7,000 or 8,000 fans in the stadium that have come to make the journey. And the opposition teams have almost been thrown back by that because they thought it would pretty much be like an empty stadium, there'd be no atmosphere, but it has genuinely been like a home match for them. And they're coached by Kwesi Appiah, who used to be the Ghanaian international manager on 2 occasions. But yeah, it's an absolutely incredible story. Their club teams are having to play in the Mauritian League as well. And they've pretty much come out and said that whenever they're playing a match for that 90 minutes, the war genuinely stops. It's the one thing that brings people together, and obviously that's it's something you kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about, the power of football in that sense. But I think in this instance, it really is a story that probably deserves a lot more attention than it has received so far. They did get beat by Niger last week, so it is in the balance if they will qualify or not.
By the time you hear this, listener, they may well have either made it or not, because they're facing the already qualified Angola on Monday afternoon. All right, well, we better wrap it up so producer Charlie can get this out to you, listener. Daniel, many thanks for joining us today, and best of luck with wherever you're heading this week. Thanks as well to Collin, to Tim, to Megan, to Julien Laurence, to Liam and producer Charlie in the booth, and you, listener. No Europod on the Tuesday for you this week, but we are back on Thursday to round up the last bits of international stuff, and of course, get ready for the return of the Premier League at the weekend. Do join us for that. For now, from all of us here, it's goodbye. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.